Thank you very much. And let me say, Victor, I was listening for the entire evening, and only last week, and this is part of what's on my mind. Only last week, I had some friends here from Suriname, and I, while one in the group had done several, tours of Barbados, there were a couple who had not really seen much of Barbados, and unfortunately, I had to decide with the. You know what I'm going to say, right? One of my favorite parts of Barbados. We had to navigate our way along the East Coast in a I don't know, in a way that I think is unfortunate. And
Yeah.
you mentioned the chaos that will unfold as of tomorrow, because school starts. It's for everybody, but it's going to be multiplied times over in relation to the challenges that you face. And we know that significant sums have been borrowed, but that is something that really uh, is worrisome. Is worrisome,
Yes.
and
Yes.
I really hope that meaning Barbadians, can hear a serious discussion. And
Hmm.
the sad thing is that one of the highest ranking officials in this administration, and in previous administration of the Barbados Labour Party administration, is the long-standing MP for St. Joseph. You know,
Yes. Yes.
and we had a similar situation in St. Andrew for many years, but but I will link that to something, because you sent me an interesting article earlier, and I don't know if Dave has it, but it is an article where the writer was referencing Mr. Peter Wickham's comment about voter apathy, and he would have sought to caution, in the context of Barbados, the Democratic Labour Party, and I would dare say other opposition parties. But I also I read the article, and it caused me to reflect on Wickham link declining turnout to failing opposition. Now, I know Mr. Wickham. I like Mr. Peter Wickham. I've known him for a long time. He was a student in my early days of teaching. He was a university colleague because he taught while I was still teaching. He was in political science, so I never taught him, but I've known him for a long time. And so, when the headline suggests, um, you know, disillusionment with the opposition, that to my mind is not the only explanation for voter apathy. And I think that this is a headline. Um, and if Dave scrolls down a bit, I would read the first paragraph. It says political scientist Peter Wickham is urging the Democratic Labour Party to pay close attention to recent election outcomes in Jamaica and Ghana. And I would dare say that any political party in the Caribbean, within CARICOM, would find itself wanting if it didn't pay attention. But the article goes on to say, because as I said, it wasn't written by him, it was written about his comments. It goes on to say, warning that low voter turnout in both countries signals deep disillusionment with opposition parties that fail to offer credible alternatives. He believes the same problem is unfolding in Barbados. Now, my background in management and decision making and problem solving tells me that there often is a more complex explanation to phenomena to issues than a single explanation. Now, in saying what he's saying, he says voter apathy to me speaks to a disinterest in supporting an alternative. And I would say that may be in part true, but I believe that there are other kinds of explanations, historic and political, um, you know, uh, as well as economic and social factors, and this is something that we need to look at. And so I would say to him, that, and I am not an official spokesperson of the DLP. I am, as you said, Pastor Ferdinand, a former cabinet member and member of the parliamentary group, a member of the Senate, leader government business in the Senate. But one of the things that I have trained people in my years of teaching in management is that we need to analyze things as fully as possible and apply a level of objective analysis. Now, when I when I read this, and in fact, when I listen to myself reading it, what I am saying, what I'm also hearing is perhaps, and I'm not saying that this is what Mr. Wickham is setting out to do intentionally, but to present that as the only explanation might very well serve to color people's thinking. Because I would say that there are, in fact, multiple explanations which any political party, and certainly the one to which I belong, the Democratic Labour Party, any political party would need to pay attention. And I think this phenomenon of voter apathy is something that we have to look at. So in addition to talking about the alternatives, I would want to suggest that in addition to that, we also have to ask ourselves to what extent and I'll focus on Barbados in this case, to what extent are Barbadians applying the same rules that they have applied to previous administrations, and more specifically to the last DLP administration? To what extent are they applying the same rules to this administration? And I would want to suggest that perhaps one of the issues that people have to come to terms with is to ask themselves, to what extent are you seriously analyzing in an arm's length objective way the current administration? If I take, for example, and the performance of the current administration, because I have to ask myself, are Barbadians applying a different set of standards? And in talking about this apathy or willingness to, how should I put it, excuse or rationalize away the behaviors of this administration, to what extent are people doing that and with what effect? So I'll give a couple examples. We talk about the road situation. We have had problems on the East Coast with road slippage, all kinds of things. But this administration not only promised to fix it, it has gone out there and borrowed a substantial amount of money. And the question is, and Victor can say, and I'm sure he said it, are you satisfied as a resident of that part of the country that the monies that have been borrowed to date have been spent wisely in addressing the problem? And Victor, I got an answer for you, and you can come out. And the answer would be no. I answer for you, but I'll ask you to comment later because I don't want to lose my train of thought. So in essence, what I'm saying is, when you look to evaluate the performance of this administration, I ask myself, to what extent are people not even bothering to think about these things and come to reasonable conclusions? So it isn't a question of not only failing to support an alternative. It is as if people have bought into the hype. People use the expression "drank the Kool-Aid" or whatever. I try to stay away from cliches, but I am just not seeing people either spending time to seriously analyze what is before them. And I'll use another example. I heard you, Reverend Ferdinand, speak about the Prime Minister's presence first in Algeria, and now in Addis Ababa.
Ethiopia.
Yeah, she's in Ethiopia attending an Africa CARICOM summit. Now, let me say very quickly, as a Pan-Africanist and as a former foreign minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, I have full support for Barbados and CARICOM's participation in building relations with the continent of Africa. And I'll say quickly why, and then I'll speak to that as part of the contradictions that make people wonder if they should, that makes me make the case that there are issues beyond the alternative opposition that influence people's
And
attitudes to voting. Go ahead.
and I will say to you, Maxine, I agree with you. I embrace that perspective as well.
You know, so you have
Yeah.
a situation where the prime minister travels. Now she's gone to Addis Ababa, she's gone to Algeria, and my position is you make the most of opportunities that are there. Africa is on the rise. It is the continent of the future. It is our and for black people in Barbados or persons of black ancestry predominantly, that is where it is. The world is looking to Africa. And I am happy to
Yeah.
say that Africa is telling the world it
Yep.
is not going to be business as usual.
That's
And that
right.
makes me extremely happy. But
Oh
that
yeah.
does not excuse how the prime minister leaves this country. And let me explain. There's a tradition and a sound set of reasons for that tradition of the country being informed about government ministers traveling, including the Prime Minister of Barbados. We are told where they're going, what they're going for, and their arms of government. The Government Information Service traditionally has been the people who cover ministries and so on. Each ministry is assigned an officer or was assigned an officer, and we are informed through official means. Now, somebody sent me, I think it's an Instagram message put up by the Prime Minister indicating that she had arrived in Algiers. Now, that's fine. If you want to communicate instantly, in fact, when the person sent that to me, I smiled because it was through an Instagram posting that I learned of the burial of the flag in Ghana, because while it was happening, somebody had posted it and it was circulated globally. And so, the whole world saw that. So that is fine, but that is not a replacement for official communication. And before people start to say, it don't matter, times change, but the more things change, the more things stay the same in a lot of respects. There are clear reasons why we are told when our government officials who represent us travel. We also should know, who is in the delegation.
Hmm.
Now, from what I recall, and I forgot to send the Instagram thing to comment from the Prime Minister to Dave. If he can find it, or if I get it later on, I will share it. But in presenting that, I think reference was made to flying on a private jet. And I can tell you that when that jet left Barbados, within hours or less, because it took about less than 8 hours to get from Barbados to Algiers, I had information on that jet, the flight path, and everything, because that's public info. That information for anybody who is an airplane enthusiast or who's
Hmm.
into shipping, you can follow these things.
Yep.
Um, and so it is clear that these things, this jet left here. Now, my question is, to whom does it belong? No, I think in the Prime Minister's message, she might have been thanking the African Bank or whatever. I don't know. But there are other times when there are allegations made that the Prime Minister is traveling or has traveled on a private jet owned by a private citizen. Now, my question, therefore, is there a quid pro quo in terms of that? What am I giving to get? Or am I paying? Is that person offering a commercial service? Now, if you say to me that we are looking at efficiency of time, because clearly we heard the Prime Minister speaking in a press conference about a minister. Some of us say quitting for personal reasons, aka also known as getting fired, and dressing it up. But the Prime Minister was here today and somewhere else tomorrow. Now, that speaks to efficiency of time use and so on. That sounds good. But at the same time, if this is facilitated not strictly on an arm's length transaction, in other words, in the same way that the cabinet has a cabinet paper which says the Prime Minister is traveling from Barbados to Timbuktu, and they're going by commercial airlines to get on a plane. I know it takes long, and you take a flight from Barbados to London and whatever, and all these things are costed and are captured in cabinet papers. My question is, can anybody, let's say the Public Accounts Committee, if the Public Accounts Committee could meet, can anybody have access to that information to say that this, if it is provided gratis, who is providing it? And I can tell you that working with the previous Prime Minister, who was not at all happy with that, his thing was that we pay our way, but sometimes these things are done. We have traveled to meetings where, for example, to get to Cuba would have sent a plane and taken foreign ministers and heads of government and heads of state to Cuba because of the difficulty of getting it at a particular point in time, and or to make it easy, etc. Those things can happen, but those things are spelled out and they are known, they're recorded, and the information is there available. So when we start to talk about contradictions or lack of information, my question is, what is it? Now, Adrian Hines says that I did extensive research on this. It starts at about 11,000 US dollars per flight hour. And it's a question of cost. Now, I would say this. Now, if I have this information and it is a commercial transaction and it is 11, that's 22,000 Barbados dollars per flight hour. And you multiply that by 7 hours or whatever. And if the plane is carrying a delegation, now I need to know, that's the other thing. We don't know who the delegations are. We hear of these massive delegations going to UAE or wherever they went and whatever, but so in essence, a simple bit of information can tell us whether it is also cost efficient. But we have no information. And so the question really is, when we move away from, or when we see the government moving away from the normal ways of providing transparent information about the movement of the Prime Minister and these things, then we have to ask the question, why? And to what extent are we seeing decisions taken which can open up the Prime Minister herself as a person often referred to in travels, or the Foreign Minister, or any minister of government, or any delegation representing Barbados, to accusations of taking favors or getting favors. If those such allegations are made, then we have to be concerned, because we have to match that against the whole issue of good governance and transparency. Adrian is saying that the jet belongs to Vista Jet, a private jet operator. Now, this private jet operator, as I said, is this person. I'm going to pause here and follow Adrian's comment. Now, there are private jet operators that would offer services to corporate entities, to high net worth individuals, and I am sure to governments. My question, therefore, is, did Vista Jet, if this is in fact what was used, was this company or this private jet operator, the services of that company, were they retained by the government of Barbados? And if so, to transport whom? because it was a CARICOM. Now, this is a thing that can be easy. There's a CARICOM, Africa CARICOM summit. The summit suggests a summit is a meeting of heads of government, typically. Sometimes some heads don't go, they may delegate authority. Typically, with summits, you would see the head of government or head of state. And for those who might forget why the difference between a head of government and a head of state refers to a president. In the case of Guyana or Suriname, some of our member states have presidents, head of government. In other cases of some CARICOM countries like Barbados, you have a prime minister. And so the question is, were we paying as taxpayers for something, and it may not, something was said. So we would need to hear categorically from Adrian. Now, let me just go back from New Jersey to Grenada to Barbados, Algeria to Ethiopia using 11. We are talking about approximately 283 Barbados dollars. Now, again, Adrian, I would have, before I comment on the significance of the $283,000, I would have to ask something that I think I started and didn't finish. What's the capacity of this private jet? Did it transport delegations or a delegation? And if it is one or both, how big were these delegations, or how big was this delegation? Because all of that would factor in. Because if you have a delegation of 3 people going somewhere, and they're traveling business class, which I use business class because that's what I travel, how I travel for 10 years at taxpayers' expense rather than first class. You can then do some calculations and you look at cost savings and you look at time savings, but we don't know. We just wake up one morning and if you're not on Instagram, you wouldn't see, and if you're not following the Prime Minister, you wouldn't see that until somebody asks you a question or poses. So I think, I'll pause because I've been hearing my voice for a while and I haven't been looking at the time. But I would say this, Pastor Ferdinand, in respect of the article that made reference to Mr. Wickham, who is perhaps seeking to paint a picture of an opposition, and more specifically the Democratic Labour Party as the main opposition party, as perhaps unattractive. I want to say and as an alternative, I want to say to Mr. Wickham that sounds good, except that life is not static. In respect of what we have seen play out in the last 2.5 years, including the present, a lot of things have changed. I want to say to Barbadians, as you read that article, that if you want to talk about political apathy, there are a lot of factors. And I sent Dave something, I don't know if he saw it. It was an article because, as I said, you have several factors which explain apathy. But there was an article which I found interesting, and this is it here, coming out of the recent election in Guyana. You know that we in the Caribbean put big store on the presence of observers. And I found this article very interesting. And it said it's a EU observers drop bombshell, says ruling party stacked the deck in Guyana's elections. And if you scroll down a bit, you will see a bit of the story. It says Georgetown, Guyana, September 3rd, 2025. The European Union's election observation mission has blown the lid off Guyana's September the 1st general and regional elections, warning that while the vote was peaceful, the playing field was anything but fair. In a blistering preliminary report released at the Pegasus Suites, EU Chief Observer Robert Biedron accused the ruling People's Progressive Party Civic, that's the PPPC, of blurring the line between state and party, using public resources and unchecked financing to give itself a massive head start. Now, I would want to say, okay, let me just read the other
Be
paragraph.
somewhere down in that area.
No, yes.
Yeah, and I am just wondering, if uh, I don't take what has happened in Guyana and what has happened in Jamaica as necessarily a final determination as what happened in Barbados, because the demographics are so dramatically different to my mind. We, for just by way of my view, we have a much stronger currency to start off with. We have to my well, I shouldn't say we have. We do have in my mind, a very informed electorate, very informed people. We do have uh, two strong parties, regardless of what has happened. We do have two strong parties. To my mind, again, Maxine, you could correct me because I don't always get these things right, but I have seen elections won in Barbados with 52 to 48 or 51 to 49, that kind of thing in percentage, government and opposition, if my mind serves me correctly. Um, so I don't know that a carte blanche statement regarding apathy necessarily applies within the context of Barbados's demographic. And I just want to throw that out there within the context of what you were sharing and theory and
I'm gonna respond, and I have a question for Thierry as well. You're correct. Well, 2022 was made even worse by restricting people who had
yes.
COVID and so on from voting. What I would say in relation to apathy, two things, because I'm going to. So let me put the question to Thierry. You can think about it while I make the point, which is what are his thoughts about apathy and on the part of young people. But I want to say this in relation to the election, and I agree with you. We can't make a categorical statement about what to expect in Barbados or like. As I say, I appreciate Mr. Wickham flagging it, but I think it requires some in-depth analysis. And I want to make this point that when we look at apathy, it works in two ways, because assuming that the opposition, as he said, is not viewed as a viable alternative, then you would expect people will vote for the incumbent in this case, that is for the government. But what we saw in the case of Barbados is that there was a fall off in votes for the Democratic Labour Party, but they did not translate in votes for the Barbados Labour Party. And
Hmm.
if you analyze constituency by constituency in the two elections, um, 2018 when the LP lost, and 2022, it will be interesting to look and analyze and see the level of fall off in numbers for the Barbados Labour Party candidates. So what that says, and I like to tie things in, maybe um, because we are talking about international reputation, etc. One of the points that I would argue is that in the face of the popularity of the Prime Minister internationally, that has not translated in significant increases of votes for her. But I want to hear Thierry speak about his thoughts on voter apathy at the level of young Barbadians.